Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. I'm going to try something a little bit different here. I am going to try and record a whole bunch of the opening paragraphs of some famous and well-regarded books, most of which that you're probably going to be aware of, and sort of talk through what they are and are not doing and various points that come out of it. Very similar to the prologue sort of stuff I've been doing for fantasy books. But I'm going broader than just fantasy here because sometimes I think when we talk specifically about fantasy, we establish an expectation and a sort of set of rules that seems to work for fantasy. And yet, a lot of what I am discussing is about writing in general, about different approaches. And sometimes that seems incongruous when so much of what I discuss is actually fantasy, because fantasy is a very specific genre now. But when we talk about writing, when we talk about what writing can achieve, I think showing what has been done in the past, showing what writing can do, is a way to open our minds up out of a set of assumptions that apply very specifically to a time, place, and genre, a fantasy talking today. So this is going to serve kind of as an introduction to this whole thing. And I think I'll try and record as many of these as possible and, sort of try and edit them together or split them up a bit. Just so there's some content on the channel because I'm still not back to being able to record as often as I like. Anyway, I hope you enjoy these. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. So, of course, this is the opening of A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Now, the first thing to note here is this is a single sentence. This one paragraph is a single sentence. If I can only imagine if an author presented something like this to an editor today, the response from the editor would probably be, no, no, you can't do that. You can't have that. No one is going to accept that. This is absolutely typical of like a run-on sentence. If anything, an editor today says, if you are absolutely desperate to keep this, what they might suggest is if you're absolutely desperate to keep this, we break it up. We start putting in full stops. We cut out some of the opposites that have been added in, and we trim it down to get to the point faster because no one has time for this. This is rambling on. We need to get to the meat of this. This is too much. You're belaboring the point. And I think for modern sensibilities, we've lost a lot of our appreciation for taking our time. That fiction has moved from something to be enjoyed at leisure to something to be consumed when we have a spare minute. And I'm not sure that that's actually a good thing. I think we've lost a lot of the enjoyment of what literature can actually bring. So let's have a look at some of these opposites. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. So if we skip to the very, very end here, remember that this is about superlative degree of comparison only. This is talking about an age of melodrama. Dickens could have been writing about today. This is how so much online discourse is actually happening today. It's not about nuance. It's not about understanding. It is about superlative. It is about hyperbole. It is about exaggeration to the nth plus one degree for everything. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. You could, this is this absolutely fantastic evocation of the absolute binary states of the most exaggerated responses that you get. The spring of hope, the winter of despair. This, I, one thing I think sometimes we forget about Dickens. Dickens was not writing high literature. How Dickens has ended up in the canon of English literature, how Dickens is regarded as one of the classics, that's one thing. But we have to remember that Dickens was writing popular fiction. This was fiction for the common man. This was fiction that everyone could enjoy, from the lowest levels of the London commoner, the urban proletariat, the working class, all the way up to the high society individuals. Dickens was for everyone. But we look at this now and we look at words like epoch, that we go, oh, well, why can't he just say time? It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I'm okay with time. Age, well, age is a wee bit anachronistic, it's a wee bit archaic. Epoch, oh, well, there's your $5 word. That we've become very, very cynical in how we approach language, almost prescriptive in what we say is acceptable. And yet, here we have Dickens playing with all of these different words to denote time. The best of times, age of wisdom, epoch of incredulity, season of light and darkness, then spring of hope, winter of despair. These are all different ways of expressing time periods. And he's playful with it. And there's no reason not to be playful with language. But if you're treating narrative and literature as a commodity to be sold, that if you are trying to market your fiction to an agent and to an editor and to a publisher so that they can sell it to the lowest common denominator so that you can make money, which, you know, that is one way to approach fiction. There's nothing wrong with approaching it that way. But you have a very different sensibility then than someone who's writing as more towards, and it is going to sound awfully airy fairy here, but more towards the side of art. That their fiction occupies a space where it is both a narrative commodity, a product that is to be sold and consumed, but narrative is also an art. It is also something that is a craft. It is something that is beautiful. An IKEA desk or a handcrafted desk made of rare materials. They're both desks. And you can go, well, you know, if you mass produce desks, you can sell it to the lowest common denominator and you can make a lot of money. So, you know, put in the least amount of effort, get something that does the job, sell it to lots of people and make your money. Or you can be a craftsman about it. Or sorry, I should say craftsperson. That it's about crafting something that is beautiful and functional. So this is part of what I wanted to address here with the opening of A Tale of Two Cities. I think it is a great example of one of the approaches to literature that we don't generally see in fantasy. Fantasy is seen very much as a commercial genre, that fantasy is seen very much as selling narrative to the greatest number of people. So it's very commercial, very market driven, and it's very much focused on getting the job done. That's how a lot of people approach it now. Get to the point, make it exciting, engage your audience. But there's lots of different ways to engage your audience, and engaging that sense of language, that playfulness, addressing the social construct of the time period we are living in, this age of melodrama. That is something that Dickens does here. And it is something you can do with literature. But whether or not it's fitting for the type of narrative that, say, you are telling or that you're interested in, that is a very different question. But you don't say that, no, you cannot do something like this. Rather, I think a way of expressing this is an opening like this is unlikely to work as well in modern genre fantasy because the expectations of the audience, the expectations of the consumer of it, are not going to be met by what we have here.